Hey, I hope everybody's had a great week so far. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody this afternoon at D Rose, so we can just spend some time together and wind down before we dive deeply into our weekend. Before I do get over to D Rose, I want to take a little bit of time to provide you with some information that I think is going to be vital as we prepare for our faculty meeting on January 27th, which is our half day. So briefly, this overcast is going to be about 25 or 30 minutes, and what I'm going to do is talk about our school improvement plan, the process that we have gone through to help develop our school improvement plan, and then hopefully that'll help you generate some questions that you can bring into our faculty meeting on the 27th. So before I present our school improvement plan, I do want to take an opportunity just to talk about, first and foremost, what is a school improvement plan, and then what is the process that we went through to develop our plan here at Hickman High School. So to clarify the purpose, what I want to do in the screencast is present our multi-year school improvement plan for as it's written 2014-15, because as you'll see later on, this is actually a plan that goes all the way into 2016. And then also we want to gain a collective understanding of the direction our school is heading philosophically, because when we decide where we're going philosophically, it'll help us to explore ways to improve our structures and our school culture and the overall student experience at Hickman High School. And finally, what we want to do is be able to present this document so we can clarify what work needs to be done and explore plans to accomplish some of those goals. So what is a school improvement plan? A school improvement plan is a living document, and I call it a living document because once you create the school improvement plan, there's no real stopping point. It is a continual data cycle that you use to help you reflect on the practices that we have in our school and how we can continue to get better. And I think that's what really separates the great schools from the good schools, or those who don't have to rest on their laurels or who don't want to rest on their laurels. Hickman High School is a great place, but we know that we can continually improve every single day. So again, the intent is to improve the schooling process for students so they can have social and academic success overall here at Hickman. A school improvement plan is also directly tied to the mission and the vision of the school. If it's not tied to those important documents, those foundational things that we said we are about, then it's not truly a school improvement plan. And then also a school improvement plan is developed and implemented in context to the most urgent need of the school. Sometimes education tends to focus on too many things at once. So what I wanted to do this year and Leadership Council wants to do this year is to focus on the things that we deem to be most important. So the most urgent area of need doesn't necessarily mean that we're failing at some particular spot, but we know that we need to make progress in certain areas. So here were our focus areas for the school year, and our focus areas developed out of our mission and vision. So I want to really focus on the vision part. Hickman High School strives to function as an effective professional learning community, grounded in a culture of best practice and predicated on relationships, diversity, and literacy. So with that, we said we want to focus on our big three areas. Clarity of purpose, knowing, first of all, what we're doing, and then why we're doing it. Why are we doing it? If we don't know why we're doing things, then we haven't truly reflected on what needs to happen to enhance the experiences of our students here at Hickman. Next, we said we wanted to focus on relationships, and those are relationships between our colleagues, colleague to colleague, relationships between teachers and students, administration to teachers, our school to the community, and our parents to the school. So we want to focus and enhance the relationships of all dynamics here at Hickman. And then finally, we said we wanted to focus on quality instruction. And we had some subcategories under quality instruction, being that we would focus on our continued development of the PLC process, as well as enhancing and fine-tuning our response to intervention processes as well. So with those focus areas in mind, it leads me into the process we went through to develop our school improvement plan. And the process that we use is really just the DMR process. DMR stands for Decision Making for Results. So this is really just using anecdotal data as well as quantitative data to help tell a story about our school and decide where do we want to focus our attention. So the DMR process, or the Decision Making for Results process, is a 6-step process. But I like to start with step 0. because step 0 really consists of the questions that you want to explore to help you develop that school improvement plan. So with our school improvement plan, our question was, what does academic achievement look like at Hickman High School? So with that question in mind, we went into step 1, which is our treasure hunt. Your treasure hunt is thinking about and deciding what are the different data points or different data sets that we can use to help us answer the question we have about what academics look like at Hickman High School. After you have these data, you analyze and prioritize the data. What are the things that are most important? So you don't want to necessarily bog yourself down with too much data, because I think that's what turns people off. Looking at mounds and mounds of data, first and foremost, without a purpose for looking at it or a question to answer, and then also not knowing what data is most pertinent to your area of urgent need. Then after you've analyzed and prioritized the data, you want to develop a SMART goal. And a SMART goal is one that is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, meaning it's a goal that you can actually reach. It's not a goal that is too far reaching. It's relevant to your area of urgent need that you have identified, and it's time bound. So you have established a time when you want the specific goal to be met. After your SMART goal, you want to develop strategies that are going to help you reach this goal. So when you develop those strategies, you also need to think about performance or results indicators. These performance indicators really mean what will success look like if these strategies are implemented with fidelity. The 6th and final step of the DMR process is monitoring and evaluation. This step is actually happening throughout the entire data cycle. So you're monitoring your progress toward achieving the goal, and you're evaluating if some of your strategies need to change, if you need to add something, take something away, but you're really just reflecting over the process as a whole. One thing that I mentioned earlier is that we have a multi-year goal, and when you're looking at those strategies and you're monitoring and evaluating, you're setting incremental goals as well. So you may not just use the spring 2016 date, which is our end date. You don't want to just use that date. You want to have incremental goals in between the start time and the end time, so we can monitor our progress intermittently. So what I'm going to do now is, well, I guess in a minute, is start to actually talk about our school improvement plan. But before I do, I want you to keep in mind that the purpose is so you can gather the information, but also to begin to develop and generate questions and comments that you may have about our school improvement plan. One downside to the flipped PD model is that I'm not there to answer questions immediately as I go through this information. So what I've done is create a Google Doc form where you can ask questions and comments on the Google Doc form, and I'm going to send that link in the email with this PowerPoint. So in addition to the goal of answering the questions that you have on the 27th, another goal is to also give you a preview of what our different teacher leadership teams are going to be doing in terms of the work to help us reach our goals throughout the semester. And I want you to always keep in mind, too, that our leadership teams are not set in stone. A lot of them are still looking for members. If you feel led and interested to get on one of our leadership teams, please contact the people who are the point people for those teams, and we'll provide that at some point in time as well. So what I want to do now is talk about Hickman High School's school improvement plan. And what I'll do is I'll walk through the steps of the DMR process as best as I can to try to streamline the process that I took and that Leadership Council took to adopt this school improvement plan for Hickman High School. The goal's on top, but I'm actually going to come back to that goal because hopefully it'll make more sense, because that's really step 3. It's just on top of this document for the purposes of being able to see it when we're looking at our document. So step 0, remember, in the DMR process is always asking yourself a question that you want to answer. So the question that Leadership Council and I developed was, what does achievement look like at Hickman High School? So notice that really wasn't just saying how many F's do we have or what do grades look like at Hickman High School, but what does achievement look like? That is multidimensional in itself. So with that question, what I think about is having a look at some quantitative data. So we do have to look at grades and what do grades show and what do they say. And then we also have to think about the anecdotal data. What are people saying about achievement at Hickman High School? what does that look like in terms of our practices and policies? How do we define achievement? So those are all the different things that I thought about and that leadership thought about as we pulled data sources together to try to develop the plan. So step one is the treasure hunt. So some of the data that we looked at, it was quite a bit of data. But the most important and pertinent data are these 3 bullet points that are listed on the screen. So the 2013 IPR and report card data, the 2013 and 14 annual performance report, the achievement gap category more specifically, and that is really talking about MSIP 5. And as a quick sidebar, MSIP 5 is the way that the state measures our progress as a school, and it has 5 different categories. Achievement is one of those categories. So with achievement, we looked at the 2013 scores on the English 2 EOC, Algebra 1, Biology, and Government. And then the last data point that I felt was most pertinent to our treasure hunt was our Hickman High School building walkthrough data. And one thing I'm trying to do this year is be very, very transparent. I know last year there was some concern about walkthrough data and the validity of the data, the reliability of that data, and a lot of confusion because it seemed like a very secretive process. The purpose was really just to collect some baseline data to see in what quadrants are our teachers teaching. And that may sound unfamiliar to a lot of people, but that's also part of understanding that we have a long-term vision, and some things have yet to be revealed. There's nothing scary about it. There's nothing that is supposed to be hidden. It's just that we know that when you're on a path toward progress and on a path toward change, you have to implement things one at a time so people do not become overwhelmed. But with the walkthrough data, it is important because that's really talking about how do we instruct students, and what does that look like when administration or when a department chair or a content coach walks in and sees what's happening in the classroom. How are the students learning? What are they doing when we come in? So that's what the building walkthrough data is about, and we'll talk about that more later on. So step 2 of the DMR process is analyzing and prioritizing these data. So in looking at those data, you break those into, you look at it through the frame of what are the strengths of the data, the challenges that you see from the data, what inferences can you make about why these data exist, and then what are some root causes. So I do want to have a quick caveat before I proceed too much into the analysis of the data. A lot of the inferences are inferences of my own, as well as the people who were analyzing the data with me. So some of these things may not necessarily seem like fact to some, but these are our perceptions and ideals about these data based on our perception of what has been happening in our school and knowing the work that we've been doing in terms of better streamlining our practices and ensuring that students are being successful in our classes, and as well as making sure that people have the tools and resources to help them be successful in that process. All right, so here are the strengths that I found in the data, and these are just the facts. So the total number of Fs across all core classes decreased from 714 in spring 2013 to 514 in spring 2014. So that was a pretty good decrease. One thing that I noticed as I go back through this data is that I neglected to put on what was our student enrollment at that time. We do know that last year, or excuse me, 2013, spring 2013, when we look at this data, we had a higher student population than we did in spring 2014. So we do need to keep that in mind. What I've done was I did a quick update to that because this school improvement plan was developed at the very beginning of the school year after having conversations with Leadership Council and looking at data from 2013 and having conversations with the faculty and surveying you all about Focus Lab and our RTI model. So there were a lot of that's when this was developed. But what I want to do is try to update this as much as possible without confusing people. So in fall 2014, I did just look at that data, and it showed that there were 328 kids that totaled 712 Fs. So that's approximately 19.5% of our total enrollment, because the enrollment for last semester in December was 1,679. There were 585 Fs in core classes, which is an increase of 43 Fs from spring 2014. Alright, to keep moving on, I'm going to go straight down the strengths column. The number of Fs decreased on each semester grade card from May 2013 to May 2014. We also noticed that juniors and senior Fs decreased by 30 and 169 students respectively on the 2013 and 2014 report card comparison. There was also significant progress made on annual progress report data from 2013 to 2014. So, like I said, there are 5 different categories where you can receive points for MSIP 5, and we received 83% of the total points possible. You can receive specific points for your end-of-course exams, and then you can also receive points in a different category called growth points. So, if you did better from one year to the next year, you also receive points for the progress that you have made. So you get points from 2 different categories. So we did receive 83 points for our annual report in 2014 as compared to 61% in 2013. So what I'm going to do now, those are the strengths that we saw. Here are some of the challenges that we found in the data. So we saw that math accounted for 33% of all core Fs in spring 2014. So the update on that is in this past semester, fall 2014, math accounted for 20% of the Fs. So with that, we have seen some progress. That's going to be one celebration. On the 2014 spring report card, the total number of sophomores Fs in core classes, it increased by 40 from spring 2013 to spring 2014. Another thing we noticed was that 18.1% of Hickman's total population received at least 1 F in core classes, even though we have all 3 tiers of the academic pyramid operating. And I say that pretty loosely because we have knowledge of the pyramid of intervention and the 3-tier approach, but I don't know if I, as the principal, have done a good enough job of explaining what the pyramid of intervention is, and then also establishing what is appropriate or an area of need when you see numbers like 18.1% of our total population has at least 1 F with those tiers operating. So that is something that I do want to work on as a principal personally, and then for our building as a whole. Something else significant we noted as a concern was that a challenge was that 7 to 12% of students enrolled in core content area classes failed the course in spring 2014. So for instance, if we're looking at math, we would say 9% of all students taking a math class failed that course. Or if we look at science, 12% of students taking a science course failed their science course in spring 2014. Those numbers, those content areas may not be exactly accurate, but I wanted to give a quick example. Another challenge, we found that there's a large gap between super subgroup achievement and overall achievement on the 2013 and 2014 APR for MSIP 5 on all tests. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper in that. It said that super subgroup achievement scores in terms of percentage of students proficient or advanced are low in comparison to overall achievement on every EOC. So CA is communication arts. Our overall achievement at Hickman High School, we had 68% of students who are proficient or advanced. When you disaggregate that data and you look at our super subgroup, which is comprised of African American students, Hispanic students, students with IEPs, students who are on free and reduced lunch. So those subgroups that used to be disaggregated individually are now combined into one group called the super subgroup, and they're only counted one time. So when you look at those students in communication arts, only 47% were proficient or advanced. In math, you see 51 and 33. Government 60 as compared to 42, and then in biology 71 to 50%. Then overall for the super subgroup, they only earned 57% of the total points possible for achievement, while we earned an overall point of 80 to 83% of the total points. Another interesting thing that I found was that the percent of students proficient or advanced on EOC exams do not correlate with the percent of students who pass those courses. So what we found out was that more kids actually pass the class than are defined as proficient or advanced. So that's just a fact. We'll look at the inferences in a second. And the last thing we found as a challenge was that walkthrough data reflect that teachers are in quadrant A 33% of the time, and that's all disciplines combined. So anytime an administrator walked into your classroom and we used a walkthrough form on our iPad, we noted that the time that we were in the class, the teacher was in quadrant A, meaning that that is more than likely direct instruction. So going back up, let's talk about some of the inferences. So as you notice, I didn't want to talk about one strength and then the inference for that strength, or one challenge and then the inference for that challenge. I wanted to look at our data as a holistic set itself and talk about, since we're looking at achievement, I wanted to look at it all under the guise of achievement. Excuse me, not the guise, but the reality of achievement. So here are some inferences that, and this is where it gets muddy a bit, because it all depends on the perception that the person who's making the inference is coming from and the eyes that they're viewing the data through. So here are some inferences that I would stand by and have delivered and shown to Leadership Council as well as our IDT, our department chairs. So one thing we said was that we're not always comparing apples to apples when we compare data across school years. For example, when we look at the number of Fs for a grade level in 2014, it doesn't always include only the students from the previous school year. So with that, we do want to make sure that as we think about how do we want to analyze data, we want to begin to look at the holistic picture from that particular grading period, whether it's an IPR or a semester grade, but then also maybe add in another layer to say, let's compare only the kids who were here the previous grading period as well to see how they did. Are they still on the F list? Did they get taken off the F list? Is there movement? What has happened? So that's what I mean by comparing apples to apples. Another inference, it seems that we're evaluating our programs holistically, but may need to give more attention to individual student progress. That goes directly with my previous inference, looking at how students are doing across the years, looking at their trends. Another inference, upperclassmen, 11th and 12th graders perform better academically. And when I say that, that means they had less core Fs than underclassmen because of the focus lab model versus the advisory model. And again, that is an inference. We don't know if that's the truth or not. That is an inference that that we made, and we thought that it was a strategy that that showed results. Another inference is that we're not always intervening with our at-risk populations as well as we should. That does directly come from our super subgroup not doing as well as our students in terms of overall achievement on those EOC exams. This next one, we have limited proactive approaches that serve the needs of our students because we're oftentimes relying on reactive measures. With this, it's really talking about our Tier 1. We do a really good job of instructing. Our teachers are fantastic. We have expert colleagues who are in the classroom doing a great job every single day. But when it comes to intervention, we have relied pretty heavily on our Tier 2 model, which is our focus lab or advisory model, and not being as proactive as possible in some instances or cases. And here are some root causes. So we implemented a new Tier 2 model for all students in 2013. But the model for 9th and 10th graders was a little bit different from 11th and 12th graders because of its limits. The students didn't have a focus lab model. Their study, they had the advisory model, and we try to do our best to create a model where there were core content expert teachers in each block who could help students individually or independently if they needed that help. But the way we wrote it on paper did not necessarily pan out the way that we thought it would. So we saw that with 11th and 12th graders, when they had an opportunity to actually go to a place that was more restrictive because we've identified them as needing additional help, they tended to do better. The students who went into Focus Lab got their grades up, and most of them were able to go out of Focus Lab and back in the study hall. And there were some students who wanted to stay in because they felt that structured environment was the reason that they started to do better in on their academics. So that's one of the reasons or root causes for juniors and seniors doing better in spring 2014 on their grades. Those Focus Labs are smaller, they're mandatory, and they did have the greater levels of restriction. And we did feel that the academic intervention model for freshman and sophomore advisory was not as strategic or intentional in communication, design, or implementation fidelity. And again, that just goes back to like what I said about not implementing it the way that we wrote it on paper. I'm not saying that it's impossible to do so, just the levels of accountability to ensure that it was implemented with fidelity was not put forth. And then also the logistics of moving students around to get them the help that they needed did pose more problems than expected. All right, another root cause. There's a heavy focus and reliance on Tier 2 intervention, but we haven't necessarily focused on Tier 1 instruction and intervention as heavily. And when I say that Tier 1 is core classroom instruction, that's the core instruction that all students receive because they're in the classroom. So the teacher's teaching the student. We get information about where students are in terms of their grade or their level of understanding in terms of skills and concepts. But we don't consistently intervene at the Tier 1 level as often and as quickly as we could, is what I mean by having a heavy focus on Tier 2 intervention. And I say that based on my observations in classrooms, as well as in conversation with teachers about needing additional support in terms of how do I intervene with students. So I'm not pushing a blame game. I'm saying as the principal, I need to do a better job of making sure that people have the tools and the skills to be better supported in terms of Tier 1 intervention, whether that be differentiated instruction or just having intervention strategies in their toolbox. Another thing I said was that our intervention model is new and needs to be further developed using the core components of an effective RTI model as defined by researchers. We know with RTI, having research-based strategies is something that is required. And then also, once you have those research-based strategies, we need to implement those with fidelity. Another root cause that we developed was that we believe that in many cases grading practices are neither universal within courses nor aligned to measures of success on standardized tests. And this does not mean that I want people to teach to a test. What we're saying is if we have a curriculum and we have a test that should complement one another, our grading practices and our instructional strategies should complement that as well. More importantly, our grading practices across the school building are not consistent in terms of what we consider to be achievement, what we consider to be proficient, how we give grades, what do grades mean. And then also I have noticed in looking at different syllabi and speaking with teachers about their individual practices that there are some PLTs that do not have consistent practices within their own PLT. So after going through our treasure hunt and analyzing the data, I actually need to go back to the top so we can look at the goal that we developed as a leadership council after looking at these data. So something that really stood out to us was that 18.1% of Hickman's total student population received at least one F on their spring 2014 grade card. So with that, we figured that almost one in every 5 students experiences failure, academic failure, as measured on the report card. So that's something that we felt that we could change and that needed to change because that's a pretty large number. So what we said was we want to develop a plan that allows the student failure rate to decrease from 18.1% of our students failing one or more classes to less than 5% by the end of the 2016 academic school year, as measured by spring 2016 student report card data. So this is our SMART goal. It's very specific. It is measurable. When we get to the point about achievable, I was challenged a bit about the 5%. And as we look more and more into it and think about what does 5% mean for Hickman High School right now, that's approximately 84 or 85 students failing, receiving one or more Fs on their grade card, and we're looking at about 16 months to achieve that. So as I stated earlier in the PowerPoint, when you have an overarching goal, especially with a multi-year goal, you always have incremental goals. Some would say that 5% may not be achievable at this time. I question that because we do have practices that we do want to put in place. Those are the strategies that I'm going to discuss briefly. So the 5% is something that may end up changing because this is still in conversation in the Leadership Council. So I do want to bring your attention to the fact that 5% is something we're still talking about. Is it attainable by 2016? We do believe that all kids can be successful and that we can change the failure rate at Hickman High School, but we want to be realistic, as a SMART goal suggests. This is a very relevant goal, and it's time bound, so it does fit the model as a SMART goal. How do we reach this goal? Here are some strategies that we've developed. So I broke it into 3 different categories: leadership strategies, organizational strategies, and instructional strategies. So we started by creating the 3 focus areas: a clarity of purpose, a focus on relationships, and focus on quality instruction. When you're trying to tackle something as large as dealing with what does academic achievement look like at Hickman High School, you have to give yourself a bit of a focus. And I think these 3 things will help us focus on achieving that goal. Making sure we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Understanding that relationships are the foundation of everything that we do. And then also understanding that quality instruction and a focus on learning is going to get us to the point that we need to be. So within those 3 focus areas, we want to delegate key components to our leadership teams to oversee. So we have our department chairs, our learning and instruction team, our student support team, and our TIDE team. The department chairs are being tasked with strengthening POTs by using research from our 7 stages of effective PLCs. As you may remember, last year we started going through a consultation process, and we had a rubric called the 7 stages of effective PLCs that was our benchmark. When you look at that rubric, it talks about what does it mean to be an effective professional learning community. So we try to, so what we're trying to do is apply that to individual professional learning teams, and our department chairs are going to help to oversee that work. They want to be instructional coaches and instructional leaders for their own departments. The learning and instruction team, they focus on our school-wide professional development. So they're going to help us by providing Tier 1 strategies, 1 or more AVID strategies, and implementing that in a professional development model. Again, I want to remind everyone that this goal is written for 14 months. So we have not talked about AVID strategies. We have not talked about specifically Tier 1 instructional strategies, but those things will be coming from our learning and instruction team when the time is right. Our student support team will focus on continued development and monitoring of the RTI model. And then I personally will lead sessions for our department chairs on the rigor relevance framework, which is Bill Daggett's work that talks about the importance of both rigor and relevance in the classroom, in classroom instruction. And then IDT is going to focus on instructional best practices within their departments. Some of our organizational strategies. We're going to change our RTI model, we already did change our RTI model to include a focus lab model for underclassmen. And again, this is something, or a decision that was made based on the data that we analyzed from the 2013-14 school year. That is the reason why we made the decision to create a focus lab model for 9th and 10th graders. We also wanted to dedicate human resources to develop a specialized intervention model within our RTI system. So when we noticed that math had a pretty significant number of Fs for 2013-14, we knew that there's something additional that may need to be done. So Lisa Nieder presented to you all at the beginning of the school year about some strategies that math was going to use. They've employed a new system that is using Tier 1 strategies and formative assessments to identify students who need direct and targeted intervention. So we have seen that some results from that, and we're very proud of the work that has happened thus far. Again, we're continuing to develop that program as well, though. We're also going to differentiate faculty dialogues, which hopefully you realize we have tried to do this school year so far, and provide you with the work you need in the moment. It's no point in you going through a one-size-fits-all presentation. If there's something specific that your PLT needs, we want to provide you with that. So constant communication between the learning and instruction team and your department chair is going to be very important in terms of giving you the professional development you need to continue your development toward becoming a highly effective PLT as measured by our 7 stages rubric. And then Leadership Council is taking the reins on helping our school begin conversations about school-wide protocols for grading practices. And then we also have a strategy to try to achieve consistent grading policies within each PLT. So here are some of our instructional strategies. I've mentioned them briefly already. LIT will implement school-wide professional development for effective Tier 1 strategies, before school, after school, collaboration days, or brown bag lunches. Just a variety of different ways of delivering professional development. And then administrators and department chairs will perform walkthrough observations using the modified walkthrough observation tool. So what I want to do is stop here with the strategies. What I'll do with our with our faculty meeting is talk a little bit about our performance indicators. What will success look like if we implement these strategies well? And then how will we monitor and evaluate our strategies continually throughout the process from now until 2016, as well as developing those incremental goals. Again, as stated in the PowerPoint, another purpose of the faculty meeting is to also talk about what is the work that our leadership teams are doing, and to also garner additional help from teachers who are interested in being on some of those leadership teams to help us through this process. So I know 30 minutes is not a substantial amount of time to walk through a comprehensive school improvement plan, but hopefully that did provide you with a little bit of information about the vision that we do have for some of the work that we're doing for the next year and a half or so. Please take the opportunity to look through the improvement plan, look at it with a critical eye, and remember that there is a link in the email that I sent with this screencast that will take you to a Google Doc where you can ask questions or make comments about that plan. My goal is to look at that feedback and use that to help develop my approach when we have our faculty meeting on the 27th. Hopefully you all have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday.